All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning ERUVIN Daf Kuf Aleph. We're going to conclude the beautiful sugya that we have on Daf Kuf Amid Beis. We left off 5 lines before the bottom of the Amid. The sugya Daf Kuf Aleph is going to be speaking about using irregular types of doors on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. And according to Rashi, the sugya will relate to whether doing an act that looks like your building is forbidden or not. Just to be aware, we had this also in Masechta Shabbos. We spoke out over there that Tosfos and other Rishonim will learn some of Kuf Aleph and some of Kuf Beis as related to Muktzah. But we're going to learn the sugya the way Rashi learns it. Mechse Kaboina will also lead us again into learning a little bit about making an oil. Guys, we learned this very good in Shabbos, Masechta Shabbos. Making an oil is also midoraisa. Making an oil arai is also midrabanan. Adding to an oil arai is completely permitted. Just to speak out now, maybe to repeat it during the shiur, that there are 2 types of oils. There is when you make an oil, when you make a covering for the purpose of covering that which is underneath it, that's more problematic. That's more like making an oil. And then there is, just giving you an example, opening up a table, a folding table. You are de facto creating an oil. You're putting a cover over something which can go underneath it. But the kavanah for making that oil is not for anything underneath it, but it's to use that which is above it. That's less problematic. However, even when you're doing something for that which is above the oil, if you're doing that and you're building walls, all arai, that also is something that you need to find the heter of how you will be allowed to do it. And we're going to learn about when you build something that creates de facto a covering for something underneath it. And walls, if your intent is, let's say, if the way you are doing it is building it milmaila lamata, first you put down the covering and then the walls come later, which is the unusual way of doing it. That will be a classical heter, which will allow us to do it. We're going to go and have again, as we had on the Tzadik Ches on the base, here we're going to have the machlokes that I've made in the Chachamim, whether a person is allowed while standing in one domain to move about an article in another domain. The Mishnah will begin speaking about one standing in a Rishus Hayach and moving something in a Rishus Harabim, or standing in a Rishus Harabim and moving something in a Rishus Hayachid. The Gemara is going to understand that there is a Chsuda Mechsera, that the Mishnah is also speaking about one standing in a Karmelis, moving an article in another domain, which to begin with is much less problematic, because what will be the fear that you're going to take it to where you're standing, even if you will, if you are standing in a karmelis, coming either from a Rishus Harabim or from a Rishus Hayachid, right? In many cases, you're going to be only violating an Isur Derabanan, and you can argue we don't make Gzeira L'Gzeira. Initially, we were Machmir Ad Meir, the Chamur Shita also extended his prohibition, even when you're standing in a karmelis, and the Gemara is going to point out in the Kuf Aleph Amid Beis that ultimately Rab Meir changed his mind. Yes, he's machmir. If you're standing in a Rishus Hayachid, you can't move things in a Rishus Harabim. If you're standing in a Rishus Harabim, you can't move things in a Rishus Hayachid. But if you're standing in a karmelis, then there is no such a gezeira. We will also discover, as we learn this daf, that many locks in the times of Chazal weren't like today. You have a little keyhole. But the whole lock in the door was so large that it was 4 by 4 tfachim, and it was more than 10 tfachim above the ground, and therefore the lock itself, many times, the ones that we'll be learning about, had a din of a Rishus Hayachid, which is very interesting. And therefore, you taking a key, right, even if you left it in another nearby Rishus Hayachid, and moving it and putting it into the lock, if you are standing in a Rishus Harabim, this will be a perfect application of the Shita of Rav Meir. That's machmir. He will not allow you to do that. And in those cases, The only way you can use that lock is by already having the key in the lock from before Shabbos, and you leaving it there for the entire Shabbos. You have it there to be able to lock it, to unlock it, but taking it out and even placing it above the door, placing it in another Rishus HaYachid, if you're standing in a Rishus HaRabbim, will be Asad Lashitas Rav Meir. If we'll have time in this daf, we're going to already begin the last Mishnah on Daf Kuf Aleph Amud Beis that will speak about a similar topic to the door issue. All the Shitas Rashi, they used to have a nagar, is some sort of door bolt. The door bolt was used because doors would open and close easily. The door posts wouldn't always stop it from swinging back and forth. And if you did not want the door to go in a particular direction, you would insert in the ground, in a hole that was already there before, a bolt, a straight, a beam, and that would protrude above the ground, so then the door would not be able to go beyond that. And again, L'Rashi, the issue of that is whether it's boina, whether it's mechzak boina, and there also Tosfos and the other Rishonim associate that sugya with muktzah. L'kula alma, there's going to be some muktzah discussion here in the Gemara. Let's start. Again, we left off at the end of the Agadata that we had on Daf Kuf on the base. We left off 5 lines before the bottom of the Amid, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So as we quoted the Pasuk in Iyuv, the Pasuk in Iyuv says that Malpeinu mi behemos aretz. That means that the animals are our teachers. There are things that we are to learn from the animals, and Chachma should be acquired from the birds in the heaven. So the Gemara says that we learn Chachma from the Tanach, who has this natural good character trait that before it has a relation with the hen, it appeases the hen. There is no forcing, there's no element of force. Now, we're going to go into details of exactly how does it appease the hen. So let's begin. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, that ilmale lenitna Torah, even if the Torah, God forbid, would not have been given, we still would have learned the character trait of being modest, machatoil, from a cat. And as Rashi says 4 lines before the bottom of the Amid, that Rashi she'enoi matal re'i b'fnei adam, that it doesn't relieve itself in the presence of any human being. And even after a cat relieves itself, it covers its excrement. It has that natural, it has that teva. Back in the Gemara, we also would have learned gazel minamala. We would have learned how we may not steal from an ant. And interestingly, Rashi brings 2 characters of the ant. Number 1 is that it saves during the summer food for the winter. This is, so to say, all because of the ant never wanting to take that which does not belong to the ant. The ant doesn't want to steal. So it has foresight. And now she says, the first line under the Gemara, and the ein achos gizelos Michael Chaverta. One ant will never steal food from its fellow. You have other chazals that tell us that we learn hard work from ants and how to work in union, to work in a group. But here we're speaking about the character trait of theft. And va'aroyos, we would learn how to be faithful, how not to be promiscuous from the yoiner, from the dove. The dove is the bird. That's the chachma me'oif hashamayim that has only one mate, and it never mates with anyone else. And derecheretz mitanagol, and we will learn this is already called derecheretz, the proper behavior, proper etiquette from a rooster. That shemefayes va'achakach boil. That before every act of relation, first it appeases its mate, and then it has a relation. What exactly is it doing? Now, in nature, you can notice that before a relation, the rooster opens up its wings, and after the relation, it shakes its head and it puts its head down and gives a little bit of a bow to the hen. So we are now interpreting what exactly is the meaning behind that. This is what the rooster tells the hen, that I will buy you a coat. That's the meaning of its opening up its wings, because when the rooster opens up its wings, then the rooster, so to say, protected and covered entirely. The matulech at karech, I'm going to buy you a long coat. Makes as a gesture, but that's only a promise. Now, de facto, it never buys the hen a coat. After the relation, Amarlah, the rooster justifies the fact that it's not buying a coat by telling the hen, and that's the meaning of this natural, it bows down its head, it shakes its head, that lish may the crown on the head of that rooster, speaking about itself, but it also has this derecheres. The Gemara always uses this expression whenever you give a curse, you never put it on yourself, even though you mean yourself, you put it on another, that if the rooster has such a coat, the lois of vinanoch, and it does not buy it to you, so then may he lose his crown. In other words, I'm not buying you a coat, not because I don't want to, but because I can't. So these are words of appeasement, a gesture of buying something before, a justification for afterwards. That's the type of piyus that puts the hen in the right mood, and there was no amount at all of coercion. And that concludes this whole sugya, that a person may never be koife es ishtoi l'dvar mitzvah. Okay, moving on to Daf Kuf Aleph. Again, we're starting a whole series of detailed halachas, most of which, at least from this Mishnah until the next Mishnah, L'shitas Rashi, we certainly begin with binyan or a mechza kebinyan, even though the Gemara certainly will also be speaking about some details of muksa. Says the Mishnah, Hadeles shebe muksa. The word muksa here refers to the backyard. In the times of Chazal, as we learned in the whole ERUVIN, the common part of your yard into which your house activity spilled over into was to your front yard. It was the house, the front yard, the mavui, the rishus harabim. People had backyards. They were called, as Rashi reminds us, rechava sha'achoirei habatim. They were not used on a regular basis. Normally it was used for storage, which is why normally you didn't need to place a proper door. Now, many people did have proper doors. But when you have an area that you barely go into, then you used to put other types of doors. The doors that we are talking about here is that a door that's not properly hinged on the wall. So the question is, did it hang? Was it connected at least with a rope? Was there not even a rope? If it's connected with a rope, how clear was it that it is indeed connected with a rope? If you were to take off the door, would it suspend in the air, which is better? Because then everyone sees that this piece of wood was designated for the door, or maybe even if there's a rope, if it's connected, but it's some of it is touching the ground, so then it's less discernible for a guy that's walking by quickly that this piece of wood was the designated door. And what's the nafkamina? The nafkamina is like Rashi, we'll read the Rashi inside, whether you'll be violating binyan if you actually insert the door into the wall by closing it. So hadele shebemutzam, or something similar. If there's a breach in a wall and you made this makeshift thorn wall that you will patch up the wall with, all right, a thorn door. And again, if the thorn door is in there, then there's nothing to speak about. The question is, what happens if you would like to put this thorn door into the wall on Shabbos, or umachat solois, or some sort of reed mat that you are using for a door? In all of these cases, Rashi says that the Mishnah says, Ein noyalin bahem, you may not close this door on Shabbos, ela im kain gevayim in haaretz, only if they're not only connected with a rope, but the rope is so small that when you take out the door, no part of the door is touching the ground. It's completely suspended in the air. Let's read a few lines in Rashi. Rashi, 5 lines from the top of the Amid. Rashi has 2 points. Either you're going to be violating mamish binyan, that is when there's no rope at all, or even if it is hung with a rope, but vinegredes means that it's laying on the ground. Some of it is on the ground. It's not completely suspended. It's no longer binyan. It's no longer isur d'oraisa. Ein ze kavua. So it's a baina or a mechza kabaina issue. It's important to remember that. So if there's no rope at all, baina. If there is a rope but it's not completely suspended, it's mechza kabaina. If it's suspended in the air and everyone can see, no, that this piece of thorn, this bunch of thorns, or this type of makeshift door was designated for the door and it was already connected to it before, so then it's not baina, not even mechza kabaina. There's a brayso that seems to indicate otherwise. It says in the brayso, delis han migredes. If you have again this this suspended door, umachatzelis anigredes, or if you have the suspended mat that people are using as a door, or if it kan hanigrar, there was a certain part of the plowing handle instruments that were also shaped in a way that they could be used as such a door. So bisman shekeshurim v'teluyim, as long as they are connected with a rope and they are still hanging, it's mashma, hanging, even if it's not suspended, as long as some of it is hanging in the air. The rope is not so long that when you take it out, it completely lays from the ground. If it's a little bit hanging in the air, then you can use it on Shabbos and no need to say you can use it on Yom Tov. And that goes against our Mishnah, because our Mishnah holds that it has to be completely suspended in the air. So answers the Gemara, Amar Abaya, you're right. You learned Pshat in the Braisa correct. There, as long as it is with a rope, and when you take it off, some of it stays above the ground because of the rope. It's not even machzor kabayna, because there was something else in that door, and that is b'sheish lahem tzir. There's some sort of hinge in the door. So again, that gives an additional appearance of this was already designated for a door. And therefore, guys, just to get something, binyan means that you're leaving it there permanently. Door means that you're going to open and close it. So it's much less binyan when it's clear that this is a door. Rava goes a little bit further, a little bit more lenient. It doesn't have to have a pivot on it right now, but even if you in the Braisa, if you can notice that this even the machatzelas, the mat, has some sort of peg protruding out, which used to be used as a hinge. If it's discernible right now, you still have to have a rope. But having a rope and it being at least partially suspended renders it completely permissible. Now the Gemara is going to ask Akasha both on the Mishnah and on the Braisa. Meisvei says yet another Braisa that is anigredes or machatzelas anigredes or this kankan, this type of a plow handle instrument that you designated to use as a door. Bisman shekeshurim vituluyim vigavoyim in haaretz afilam oloynima, as long as it's connected with a rope, and it's again, it doesn't have to be fully suspended from the air. It has to be fully suspended in the air. All of it, even if the lowest part is only above the thickness of a needle, thickness of a hair, then it's good. But the moment it's resting on the ground, the imlav ein noyalin bohem. Okay? So this goes against the Braisa. The Braisa, we just learned in the Braisa that doesn't have to be fully suspended. So here again, Abaye and Rava will both give their same approach. Abaye says, Abaye mataretz l'tamei, Rava mataretz l'tamei, Abaye mataretz l'tamei, that you have to add in the Braisa, in this last one that we learned, Oy sheyesh lahem tzir, because if there is a tzir, then it does not need to be fully suspended in the air. Oy shegavayim in haaretz, which is what we learned in the Mishnah. Rava will just tweak it according to his sheet, who's a bit more lenient. Rava mataretz l'tamei, the last narrow line, that this last Braisa is either kishahoya lahem tzir, and kishahoya lahem tzir, then it does not have to be fully suspended in the air, or if there is no such tzir, there was never such a tzir, so then oy kishagavoyim in haaretz, then like we learned in our Mishnah, it has to be fully hanging in the air. Tana Ramana we learned in our Braisa. Soichei koitzim, branches from a thorn bush, the chavilim and bundles of wood, shehiskinon, that prior to Shabbos, prior to Yom Tov, they were designated to close a breach in the walls in a chatzir. Right, the same case of our Mishnah says the Braisa, bisman shekeshurim vituluyim, when they're both tied to the wall and they are suspended, then which is similar to the din in our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Tani Rabbi Chiyam, Delis Almana. Here we're learning about a new type of door, not like the ones we learned in the Mishnah, but we're speaking what's called a widowed door, which means there's something about this door that you look at it and it looks like a widow. Something basic is lacking when a woman without a husband. So hanigredes, if it's dangling in the air, and Tosfos adds, it's dangling in the air, even though it has a tzir. And what did we just learn? That if it has a tzir, then it being dangling should be good enough, even if it's not fully suspended. Yet it says, you may not use it. So this poses a contradiction. So says, hey, okay. So it must be that this door is so far from it being used normally as a door, even though it has a tzir, the tzir doesn't help it. So what type of door is that? Heichi dami delis almana. So says the Gemara, either ika da amri the chat shifa, there's only a single board. That means it's very, very thin. Normally a door is made out of two boards. Here there's only one, and that makes it even less than the reed mat, which is why even though there is a tzir, even though there is a rope, even though it's partially hanging in the air, but it's not fully suspended, you may not use it. And the Ikad Amri, even if it has more than one board, the lace lay gishma, there isn't this cross beam that connects the two boards, making the door thicker. So there might be two boards, but they're just connected together with nails or something like that. In other words, the more inferior the door is, the more problematic it is. The more we need to have the precondition that the Mishnah spoke about, which is that it has to be fully hanging in the air. The more it looks like a door, then the less problematic it is. And therefore, as long as it's connected with a rope, even if some of it is on the ground, you're still good to go. Okay, now we're going to go into the laws of oil, which is very similar to binyan. Like we mentioned in the intro, there is an oil that you're placing for that which is underneath it. That's a problem. Even if it's an oil arai, you are only allowed to add to an oil arai. That you can do, but you can't make an oil arai. On the other hand, if you're putting something horizontal, which de facto it becomes a oil for whatever is underneath it, but you're not doing it for that which is underneath it. You're doing it for that which is above it. Even if when you're placing this covering, it's coming also with walls, here we have hetadim that will allow you to place it. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Hai Medurta, here we're speaking about Yantiv, and you're building a bonfire, and one of the ways of building it is putting out logs. And ultimately at the end, you're going to have some sort of platform on the top with walls on the sides. So this, and even though you're not doing it to use the one tefach airspace or more underneath it, you're not doing it for underneath it, but you've created some sort of oil arai. So says Rabbi Yehuda that milmaylo lamatra shari, that if you are building it, first placing the cover, then building the walls, this is the nuance. Since your kavana is not for that which is underneath it, even though you're not adding, you're making a new oil arai, it's going to be mutter. However, if you're building it bottom up, then it's going to be usher because of the rabbinic prohibition of making an oil arai on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. And similarly, says Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to have this then again in Masechta Beya, the Chen Beyasa. Rashi says there were certain eggs that they were placed, you had some sort of two wooden or two metal walls and on the side of the fire, and then you would place the egg on top, and that's the way the egg would roast. So when you place the egg, you're de facto creating an oil, which is their sides that are holding up the egg, and then you have the egg on the top. Now, guys, just to know, there are many other details about oil. One of them is that an oil has to be at least a tefach. We learned this so many times when it comes to Hilchas Tumah V'Tara. There has to be a tefach of airspace underneath it. There has to be so maybe the egg was the size of a tefach. Not that long ago, we spoke out, we quoted the Noid Rabbi Yehuda, that says that the eggs in the times of Chazal were double the size the eggs we have now. So then maybe Taka can be a tefach. Okay, here also, how can you place it? So the only way you can place an egg on fire on Yom Tov, first you put the egg on the right height, and then you put the two holders on each side. The Chen Kidraf, you have two pots. If for whatever reason you're making some sort of, you're putting one pot on top of two side pots. And here again, there's going to be a fire underneath it. You're using the two side pots as a means of holding up the pot to that exact height. Today, you can lower the fire, not on Yom Tov. They didn't have those options. So one way of keeping the food hotter or warmer was lifting it up higher or lower. So if you're placing one pot on two side pots, here again, you can argue you're making an oil arai and a chanami. However, if first someone holds the top pot, and then one person or two other people put down the sides, you're building in an unusual way. You're building the way God builds. Milmaylo lamata, that's okay. Same thing with a bed. Same thing. You're setting up a bed. When you set up a bed, we're not speaking about a bed. We're speaking about a bed that has walls all the way down to the ground. So how can you open up this makeshift bed? Now, the high-rise beds are much less problematic because there are no mechitzas. These are beds that have a mechitza. So again, you're not building a bed to go underneath it, but still, you're making an oil arai. Here again, first you put down the top board, and then you put down the side frame. That's the puria. And v'chein chavis, and the same thing with barrels, the way they used to store barrels. Used to put two here and then one on top. In all these scenarios, wherever you are having an oil that's one tefach wide, and underneath this, there's a one tefach of airspace, even though it's arai, but normally you can't build an oil arai. But since you're not building it for underneath it, then this heter of milmaila lamata is acceptable. Now that we spoke about this door that they used for the muktzah or for the pirza, made out of thorns. So now the Gemara says, "Amaisim with thorns." A little bit of Magadata. Amar le'Yahu tzeduki l'Rabbi Yishua ben Chananya, and he began a conversation by calling him Chit Ka'a, you thorny one. Why did he call a Jewish chacham thorny one? He says because it says a pasuk in Micha, that your best ones are like thorns. And this is a classical example of people that quote part of a verse, or they take something out of its context, because when you read the rest of it, or when you read the context, you understand that it can mean the opposite, which is a typical thing. What Tzedukim, which were the people that began Christianity, it came from the Tzedukim, what they do until today, they quote verses. You don't see the context, and they mamish show it to you as if it means the opposite. And that's why he called him a shatya. A shaita is someone that looks at something out of context. Amalei shatya, shvil say for the crowd, go weiter. Since it says afterwards in the same verse, yashar mimesucham, which means that the upright ones, the yasharim amongst the Jewish people, are like a sukkah. They are some sort of, they give us shelter. So the same verse that's complimenting our tzaddikim cannot begin by speaking about them in a derogatory way. So what is the meaning that they are toivam kechadek? Not kechadek in a bad way, but in a good way. That keshem shechadokim halolo magilam alapirtzam. This is the link to our Mishnah. Just like people use thorns to put them into a breach, which keeps whatever is inside those walls protected. Kach toivim shebanu, they protect us. They protect us like a thorn wall. Meaning that they crush the wicked, so to say, as if they are thorny. They are thorny to the wicked. As it says, Kumi, get up, stand up, Vadoishi Basion, and thresh Basion. We're speaking about how ultimately Yerushalayim will take vengeance on all of the wicked. God says that I will make your horns of Basion as brass, as metal, as metal. And your hoofs, I'll make into brass. And and you will crush many nations. So here you see that, that crushing klipa, they are thorns to klipa. And that's the end of this conversation. Okay, Mishnah. Now here, we're going back to the Mishnah of Tzadik Ches. That has to, obviously, there's a reason for the Seder, but the Mishnah of Kuf Aleph, Hadela Shebemuksa, Rashi, Binyan, Mechzeke Binyan. The Mishnah that we're going to have in the bottom of Kuf Aleph will be again Mamish, Rashi, Binyan, or Mechzeke Binyan. And up here in the middle, we're speaking about standing in one domain and moving something in another domain. And L'chu'ura, the Hemshech HaDvarim, is like we mentioned in the introduction, that it was normal that the types of locks, the keyholes in the times of Chazal were in their own domain. It was like a big thing, a big key box. And we're speaking about doors. Many doors have locks. And according to one Tana, which is Rav Meir, it's not so pashut b'chlal to use a lock to open up a door on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. Because if you are standing outside your home, if it is at a Reshus HaRabim, and as we'll see, according to the initial opinion of Rabbi Meir, even if you're standing in a carmelis, even if the key was, let's say, on top of the lintel in a Reshus HaYachid, and all you're doing is you're taking it off and you're putting it into the keyhole. That means you're moving something, the Reshus HaYachid, while you are standing in another domain. According to Rav Meir, that's prohibited. That's l'chayda the hemshech. It's just about details of how to use a door. Even though, let's go. So the Yamid Adam Reshus HaYachid, you may not stand in the Reshus HaYachid, the Yiftach, and open up a door if the door is in the Reshus HaRabim. Obviously, this door in the Reshus HaRabim is not the type of lock that is a Reshus HaYachid. No, the door is a Reshus HaRabim, because you can't move something. You can't move a key in Reshus HaRabim airspace. Likewise, you can't be standing in a Reshus HaRabim and open up a door, but Reshus HaYachid. Problem is, See, here's their problem, because it was common that the door lock was a reshus hayachid. So what should you do? So I said before, leave the key in the lock. Were you kidding? So what's the point of having the lock? So what you have to do before Shabbos is, you stand in the Reshus Harabim right near your door. Before Shabbos, build a mechitza that will render the area that you stand in when you open the door into a Reshus Hayachid. Then you're good. If you are in a Reshus Hayachid, then you can take the key from the top of the lintel, you can put it into the key lock, because you're moving about something while you are in a Reshus Hayachid, and the key itself is in a Reshus Hayachid. And these are the words of Rabbi Meir. And that is what we quoted when we learned Tzadik Ches Amud Beis. And the Gezerah is, like Rashi says, is because you might bring it to yourself. And if you bring it to yourself, well, if you are B'Reshus HaYachid, B'Reshus HaRabim, then you'll be violating an Isur D'Oraisa. Amrullah, the Chachamim disagree with such a thing. They allow you Lechatchila, even when you are standing in one domain, to move about something in another domain. So they have no restrictions. There was never a worry about how can I open up my door. And they proved it to him. They argued with him by Maisa B'Shuk Shal Patamim. Patamim, he writes on the side in the Aruch, it was some sort of Moichlei Oifus market. It was a chicken market. That was in Yerushalayim. That it was common, Shehoyun Le'alim Amanichem As Amaftech B'Chaloim Shal Gabi HaPesach. They would put it on the window on top of the door, and they would be standing L'chura in the Reshus Harabim. And while they're standing in the Reshus Harabim, they would get the key and they would move it into the lock. So L'chura, they're moving things about in a Reshus HaYachid. Rabbi Yossi says, true, but it wasn't. That was the common minhag, not in the shuk of Patamim, but shuk shel Samarim. It wasn't a wool market. Bottom line is, it's like Maiserav. No one was afraid. There was no such a chashash. There was no such takonas chacham. So the Gemara says, V'Rabbanan, normally the Gemara would say V'Rabbi Meir. V'Rabbanan means, wow, they have a good point. They're saying that this is the way the minhag was. So what would the Rav Meir respond to that? So says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Meir, So the answer is, Rav Meir was telling you the Isser is between a Reshus Harabim and a Reshus HaYachid. Either way, you may not move in the other domain. But and you're trying to refute me from that which happened in Yerushalayim. The whole city of Yerushalayim was only a carmelist. And therefore, even when Rav Meir, that's the beginning now, and that's going to be the end. We'll get to the middle in a moment. If you are an carmelist, then you could put your hand in a Reshus HaYachid, remove the key, put it into the key lock. Because even in the worst case scenario, you're only going to bring it to a carmelist. Carmelist itself, Reshus HaYachid to a carmelist in itself is only an Isur Midrabanan. So you don't make a double Gzeira. The Amar Rabba Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, Yerushalayim, Il Malei Dal Sisel, and Olis Balayla, if they would leave the doors open at night, then Yerushalayim would be a Reshus Harabim. But the fact is that Yerushalayim used to close its doors at night. And because of that, it renders the whole city of Yerushalayim, even when the doors are open, into a carmelist. It's no longer a Reshus Harabim. So therefore, why are you bringing me a raya from the Shuk Shel Patamim or the Shuk Shel Samarim when it's not relevant to the way Rav Meir says his sheet in the Mishnah? Okay. So now, actually, this becomes a kasha. So why did the Rabbanan challenge Rav Meir? Rav Meir never spoke about a carmelist. So Amar Rav Papa says, Rav Papa, no. That can, or you have here Rabba, can, koydem sheniftusu v'peratzois, can la'acha sheniftusu v'peratzois. Not so simple. Yes, Rabbi Yechanan, there was a time that Yerushalayim was a carmelist. But at a later time, because of other breaches in the wall that was never fixed, Yerushalayim returned to be a Reshus Harabim. It went from a carmelist to a Reshus Harabim. So the Chachamim could refute Rav Meir from Yerushalayim, because they were referring to the minhag that happened at the time that Yerushalayim was a Reshus Harabim. Rava says, no. The fact that the Chachamim challenged Rav Meir from Yerushalayim, Rava holds Yerushalayim has a din of a carmelist. But you know what? You have to add something that's not explicitly written in the Mishnah. Rava Amar, Sefer Ason L'Shadegina. There's another case. Rav Meir initially was even machmir if you are standing in a carmelist, which will be an example of a gino. A garden is a carmelist. It's not a Reshus Harabim. How is it? Why is it not a Reshus HaYachid? So let's just say that you are, let's say, in a karpaf shalayuk of ladira. That's very large. It has a din of a carmelist. There are cases that you are in a carmelist in which Rav Meir initially also said it's usher. And for that, they refuted him properly. They refuted him properly from the minig, the Maiserav in Yerushalayim. And Bahachi Ka'amar, and this is what we have to add in the Mishnah. This is all Shitas Rabbi Meir, that the Chein lo yamid b'reshus hayachid the yiftach b'karmelis. Or likewise, you cannot stand in the karmelis and open up the kilak if that all that is in the reshus hayachid. Guys, just for the sake of clarity, we're not speaking about taking the key from the karmelis and moving it into the kilak. No one says you can do that. Obviously, you can't carry midrabanan from a karmelis into a kilak if that is a reshus hayachid. We're speaking about even if the key itself never went into the karmelis. Rav Meir says the fact that you are standing in the karmelis, you may not move about anything in the reshus hayachid. Daf Kuf Aleph Amid Beis. Elam Kain, and on that he says Elam Kain also mechitza gavayasar tvachim de'ameir. Only if. So what are you going to do? Make sure that the area that you normally stand in when you open up your door, you render it into a reshus hayachid, and taka on that is where the Chachamim told Rabbi Meir, I hear what you're saying, but that's not what people did. Amrullah, Ma'aseh v'suk shel patamim, shoyer b'Yerushalayim, shohoyu lo ya'alim umanichem es maftech b'chalon shel gabei ha'pesach. Once they never brought it into the karmelis, they would put the key on top of the lintel. They would put the key in another reshus hayachid, but they were standing in a karmelis. Rabbi Yossi says it wasn't the shuk shel patamim, it was a shuk shel tzamarim. So this Maiserav is a refutation of Rabbi Meir Shita regarding a karmelis. And indeed, as we'll learn this Braisa, it's beautiful. We're going to see that initially, clearly, very good. That's a very good picture just to see that it's a good picture for many reasons. Whoever's not seeing the picture, if you have a door and you have an area above the door in which you can put a key, that's just a nice picture. You can hide the key there. And then you have the key lock itself. If it's 4 tefachim wide, in many instances, it will have a din of a reshus hayachid, and that's something that the Rishonim really have to add more details to, because normally any area that's above 10 tefachim, right? If it has mechitzas, it's a reshus hayachid. If there's no mechitzas, normally above 10 tefachim is a makom ptur. For whatever reason, the common was that the whole key structure that you put, not the key lock structure, was a reshus hayachid. And you have in the picture also that there is an eskufa, which many times the iskufa, if it's 3 tefachim or more above the airspace of the reshus harabim, above the ground of the reshus harabim, that becomes a karmelis, even if it's 4 tefachim. So that's just a great example of you having the option of standing in a karmelis and taking the key from the top and putting it into the key lock. Maybe there is no iskufa, but what we will see now on this Braisa is that Rav Meir explicitly, clearly, Takeh was also machmed even from karmelis to the reshus hayachid, and therefore also the opposite. And that makes the flow of the Mishnah make a lot more sense, because they refuted him from Yerushalayim, which is a karmelis. And in this same Braisa, it doesn't say the words that Rav Meir changed his mind, but you begin reading the Braisa, you say, Oy Gamal. In middle of the Braisa, you see that Rav Meir changed his mind. And he only is machmir mireshus harabim to reshus hayachid, or vice versa, but not from a karmelis. So let's go. Tanach Rabbanon, write the 2 dots on that kufal of the base. Tanach Rabbanon, pischei shari ginam, a door of a garden. In other words, this base sha'ar provides you access from outside the garden into the garden. Now they would place this little booth either in the street or within the garden. We're speaking about a garden that has a din either of a reshus hayachid, or over here, if it's a very large garden, either there's no walls around it, or even if there are walls around it, but if it's more than yosim beis osayim, that's the classic karpaf, shalayukaf ladira, that Chazal gave it a status like a karmelis. So that's the issue. The issue is that you are in a karmelis, that the door itself is the key box is a reshus hayachid. How can you open it up? However, the good thing here is that you have a pischei shari gino, which means you have some sort of gateway, you have some sort of little booth that is also a reshus hayachid, which is great. So bisman sheyesh lahem beis sha'ar b'mafnim, if you have this little house, this little reshus hayachid in the inside, let off Meir, this is in the initial shita that you cannot stand in the karmelis and take something from the Rishus HaYachid into a Rishus HaYachid, well, at least you are able to open and to close using the lock when you are standing inside the Beis Shad, because the Beis Shad is a Rishus HaYachid. You're taking the key from the lintel, the Rishus HaYachid. You're putting it into the key box, the Rishus HaYachid. You're doing nothing wrong. Then not from the outside, because if you are in the outside L'chayr is even a Rishus HaRabbi. That's something that Rav Meir never even changed his mind. If you stand in halachic Rishus HaRabbi, you may not take a key from the lintel and put it into the key box, even though the key never entered the Rishus HaRabbi. But you are standing in the Rishus HaRabbi. If the Beis Shad is on the outside, the Agavaldik, with permission, without permission, in other words, it doesn't take up any part of your garden, then you are only allowed to open it mibachutz. Clearly, Rav Meir is holding that if you are inside the Gina, even though the Gina is for sure not a Rishus HaRabbi, the Gina can be a Carmelis, you may not open it when your feet are on a Carmelis, because you are standing on a Carmelis, you're taking the key from somewhere that's a Rishus HaYachid, you're going to put it into the key box, which is a Rishus HaYachid. Rav Meir initially also held that that's also midrabanan. Mikan u'mikan, if they built a Beis Shad both inside and outside, good. So then, and if there is no Rishus HaYachid for you to stand in while you are moving the key, so then the Braisa says that Rabbi Meir holds, Asurin, you may never move the key into the key box. The only solution would be from before Shabbos, but Asurin Lakan Lakan. The only solution would be for you to have the key already in the key box. Now, obviously, that would only be good if it's on the inside. And then a Chanami. And then you can't, the Kitzur Rav Meir initially held that you may never stand in any domain other than in a Rishus HaYachid and be allowed to open up a lock. We're speaking about those locks that the lock box itself was a Rishus HaYachid. Now the Braisa says, V'chein chanuyois hapsuchas l'Rishus HaRabim, stores that are open to Rishus HaRabim, Bizman shahamin oil l'mato ma'asara. Oh, what's l'mato ma'asara, my friends? If the key box is under 10, what's under 10? Under 10 is not a Rishus HaRabim because it's the key box was 4 tfachim. Any area that's 4 tfachim, as long as it's not lamata migimel tfachim to the ground of the Rishus HaRabim, has a din of a karmelis. So here we're going from a Rishus HaRabim to a karmelis. Again, initially Rav Meir was machmer. So then there's no bereda according to Rav Meir. So what do you need to do? Maybe mafteach mi be'erev Shabbos. Oh, no, 1 second. So here you take the key from erev Shabbos. Umanichoy be'iskufa. You put it on the threshold. That means you put it on the karmelis. So now you are moving it from a karmelis, right, to a karmelis. You take it from the karmelis, you bring it to the karmelis, and you put it back in the karmelis. Now, 1 second. Where are you standing? You're also standing in the karmelis. Atkan, great. But if the key box is above 10, and we're going to understand that the moment the box is above 10, it becomes a Rishus HaYachid. The iskuf as a karmelis, then maybe mafteach mi be'erev Shabbos, umanichoy bimanoil. You have to leave it right on top of the lock. You have to leave. You can't leave it on the iskufa, but you can leave it on top of the lock. And if it's on top, what's on top of the lock? The lintel at a Rishus HaYachid. It's l'mayla masara. So if you leave the key l'mayla masara, then l'machar peseach v'noyel. Then tomorrow you can stand on the iskufa. You can take it off the Rishus HaYachid and put it into the key box. That's a Rishus HaYachid. Clearly, Rav Meir changed his mind here. Mamash, that's amazing, because we learned in the first part of the Braisa clearly otherwise. That even if you're standing in a karmelis, you can't move the key from one Rishus HaYachid into another Rishus. You can't do that. So it's amazing. So he begins being super machmir, and all of a sudden here, as the Gemara is going to explicitly say, Rav Meir himself changed, and maybe he changed because he heard the pushback that we had in the Mishnah from Ma'aseh Rav, from the Shuk Shel Patamim, or from the Shuk Shel Tzamarim. Now, even when the lock is above 10 tvachim, that means when the lock is a Rishus HaYachid, you can bring them after Echmed of Shabbos and you can put it on the skufa. You can leave it on the skufa. By the way, how can you do that? How can you take it from the lockbox and put it in the skufa? So here, that's another topic that we're not going to get into right now. But like we mentioned, the kitzur, that just because the lockbox is 4 tefachim, just because it's 10 tefachim above the ground, if there aren't mechitzas that are 10, then what is that? Then it should be maybe a makom ptur. Or the Gemara is going to give another option, that the lockbox itself was not 4 tefachim wide. And if for sure, if you have an area that's not 4 tefachim wide, what is that called? It's called a makom ptur. The problem is, why would Rav Meir call it a reshus hayachid? We're going to get to that in a moment. But they view the lockbox as a makom ptur. So not only, so you can, on Shabbos, forget about standing in one domain, moving things in another domain. You can take the key from the makom ptur and put it back down on the karmelis. Or the chaloin again, we must be speaking about that there is a chaloin that's not 4 tefachim, so that's a makom ptur, and you can take the key from the chaloin and put it on the iskufim. However, but if this window sill or this window has 4x4, and you are in a karmelis, so then you may not take the key from a makom, from a reshus hayachid, arba al arba is a reshus hayachid, and put it in a karmelis. Asur b'pnei shuka moitzi l'reshus l'reshus. Okay, karmelis to reshus hayachid. Now proves the Gemara again how Rav Meir initially taka the way we learned, the way Rava learned, was machmir even from a karmelis, and then, as we'll see right now, Rav Meir changed his mind. The fact that the Braisa gives 2 examples, one from the Pischei Sharegina on the Beis Shar, and then v'chein chanuyos. The chein means it's similar, just like it's clear that the garden is a karmelis, so is going to be the case of the iskufa, because the Braisa never explicitly said that the iskufa is a karmelis. But if the iskufa would be a reshus harabim, then the words v'chein doesn't fit, because it's not the same case at all. So now the question is, then everyone should consider it a makom ptur. So it's a reshus hayachid. How can the Chachamim say here in the Sefer that you can take the key from the manor and put it on the iskufa that we just established is not a reshus hayachid? The iskufa is like the garden, which is a karmelis. The aft is mancha hamina lamayla miyud, and if it's lamayla miyud and it's 4 tefachim, it's a reshus hayachid. Maybe mafteach me'erev Shabbos umanicha be iskufa, and then lamacha pesach v'noel b'ay mazir iskufa. Forget about standing in one domain and moving things in another domain. Here the Braisa is speaking about from where you're taking the key and into where you are placing the key. Or you can take it lachaloin shal gabi pesach and bring it down to the iskufa. How can you do that? How can the talpon likamelis to the reshus hayachid? So first, that has to be clarified. Because you see clearly that there is a machlekes Rav Meir and the Chachamim how to view the manor, whether the manor is considered the reshus hayachid or whether it's considered the makom ptur. And if one is speaking about a small, one is speaking about a big, it doesn't fit. So the Gemara says, the case is there aren't 4 tefachim width in the lockbox. However, this goes into a larger machlekes in which each one will hold l'shitosaihu Rav Meir and the Chachamim in the machlekes of choikikim lahashlim, which is the machlekes that they speak out when it comes to mezuzah. In order for a door to be mechoiv mezuzah, it has to have 10 tefachim height and 4 tefachim width. And what happens if the doors don't go up 10 tefachim, but at a certain point they begin to go in like a Spanish dome? It begins to make a curvature, and then on the top you don't have 4 tefachim width. So as long as you have in the first 3 tefachim off the ground 4 tefachim width, Rabbi Meir is the one that holds that if the wall itself is wide enough that if you were to carve out, if you were to change the form of the Pesach, it should not be curved, but it should be boxed. Then when you hit the height of 10 tefachim, you can make the width of 4. That's not the picture for what we're speaking about, but we had this machlokes many times. So Rabbi Meir holds choikikim lahashlo. Let's read it inside. So Amar Abaye again, that la'olam the ein boyar ba'a, the lockbox in the picture doesn't have 4 tefachim. However, the 4 tefachim that we're speaking about is not the width. The 4 tefachim is the depth, because it has to be reshus hayachid, has to be 4x4. And we learned this on Amud Aleph that they used to have double doors. That was the whole Belis Almana. And if you were to keep on chiseling out in the depth, you would come to 4x4, but it's not chiseled out. Rav Meir holds so we view it as a reshus hayachid. And therefore, you may not carry from a Rishus HaYachid to a Carmelist, that Rabbanan hold ein choikikim lahashlim, which is why they say that if this is not above 10 tfachim, right? They hold that it has a din of a makom ptur, can be above 10 tfachim. You are lachatchila allowed to carry from a makom ptur into a Carmelist. The iskufa is a Carmelist, and you can make that type of transfer. Okay, now that we clarified this detail, that the lockbox is one that's not 4x4, but because of Rav Meir's sheet of choikikim lahashlim, it has a din of Rishus HaYachid. So from this brayso, we learn 3 dinim. Number 1 is Rav Meir holds again choikikim lahashlim. Know that the fact that in the beginning of the brayso, by the gina, the whole case of the gina, if it's not without a beisha, Rav Meir does not allow you to put a key into the lock. Why not? Because you're standing in a garden. Who cares? The garden is only a Carmelist. But that's what the Rava says, that Rav Meir's chumrah even went from a Carmelist to a Rishus HaYachid. But then at the end, when he's speaking about the store, mitamol, he doesn't allow you to carry it from a Rishus HaYachid into the Carmelist. But Rav Meir says that you can take the key from the lintel, Rishus HaYachid, you can put it into the lockbox. Rav Meir, the lockbox, because of choikikim lahashlim, is again a Rishus HaYachid. You are standing on a Carmelist. Hold on, you're standing in a Carmelist. So here you see, now that we have that, anytime you're standing in the garden, you are allowed to use the lock, even if the lock is on the lintel. That means that you are standing in a Carmelist, you're not standing in a Beishad. You can take the lock from the lintel and put it into the lockbox because you're moving something, you might take it to yourself. Even if you're going to do that, you're only violating the Rabbanon. So we don't make Exeter. And the Shomat Mina from the Rabbanon that they only allow you to take the key from a makom ptur, from a Carmelist to a makom ptur, from the makom ptur back into the same Carmelist, right? Because they spoke about either leave the key on the skufa, open it and put it back on the skufa. They speak about putting the key in the lintel and the chaloin above and putting it into the lock and putting it back on the chaloin. One thing what they don't say is that you can't take it from the chaloin and put it into the lockbox and then put it on the iskufa. You cannot transfer an item from one domain to another domain via the makom ptur. Yes, you can go from a Rishus HaYachid to a makom ptur and back to that Rishus HaYachid. You can go from a Carmelist to a makom ptur back to a Carmelist. You can go from a Rishus HaRabbim to a makom ptur and back to the Rishus HaRabbim. But you can't make a stop in the makom ptur and then take it to another domain, a domain into which you were not allowed to take it straight. And that's the din that was taught by Rav Dimi. The Chiyasi Rav Dimi, he said in the name of Rav Yechanan, that makom she'im by arba l'arba, makom ptur, mutim l'vnei Rishus HaRabbim l'vnei Rishus HaYachid l'katav olav. Each one can make use of that area. However, but don't go from the Rishus HaYachid, put it on this post, and then take it from there to the Rishus HaRabbim, or the other way around. Which is why, again, the Braisa spoke about Carmelist, lockbox, back to the Carmelist, Chaloin, lockbox, back to the Chaloin. And don't forget, L'Rabbanan, since they don't know Chokikim Lahashlim, the lockbox of the Braisa, which is less than 4, is a makom ptur. So from Rishus HaYachid to a makom ptur back to the Rishus HaYachid, or Mikarmelist to a makom ptur back to that Carmelist, and not from the Iskufa to the lockbox and to the Chaloin, not from the Chaloin into the lockbox and back down, because then you're moving it from Rishus HaYachid to a Carmelist via makom ptur, which is Asur. Okay, we have time. Let us chap the next Mishnah. So as we mentioned, when we learned the Mishnah Daf Kuf Aleph on the top, Rishitas Rashi, we are speaking about doing something on Shabbos or on Yom Tov that is either Baina or Mechzek Baina. So they used to have in those days, today when you close your door, so they built the whole door structure in a way, the door can normally open in one direction. I'm not talking about a swinging door, and it will never go into the other direction. It can't. In those days, in order to prevent the door going in a certain direction into which you never wanted to go, they would have a bolt, a negor or a nagor that they would insert in the ground. Putting that nagor in the ground, again, Larashi, not muksa. It's about whether it's boina or mechzek boina. So says the Mishnah, neger sheyesh b'roshei gelustera, that if this bolt has some sort of knob on one side, that's not the side that you put into the ground. It won't fit into the hole in the ground. But that knob allows you to use this bolt also as a pestle. You're rendering it into a keli. When a person sees that you're using an instrument that you need in your kitchen for the bolt, they see that you're not going to leave it there. It noticeably, when you do something that people who look can notice that it will not be affixed there, that takes it away from the binyan problem. Nevertheless, Rabbi Eliezer is oiser. Rabbi Eliezer is oiser, unless, go back to the first Mishnah, unless this negar has a rope in which it's connected to the door, and when you take it out of the ground, it's built in a certain way that it will never rest on the ground. It's going to fully be suspended in the air. Then everyone sees that that this was already prior to Shabbos. This is made as a bolt. It's clear that you will not leave it there. It's not part of the building, and that's why it's okay. And then it will be okay. But if there is no rope into which this negar is hanging upon and not fully hanging in the air, then it's also, even though there is a glustara, which should make it better. Rabbi Yossi is matir. Rabbi Yossi holds that if you have this glustara, and therefore, Rashi says, let's read inside the last Rashi here. Rabbi Yossi matir, because since the Toiras Keli Olav Mishum glustara, therefore, clearly, loi mechsa keboina. People know that you're not going to leave it there because you have the usage. You're going to use it for a pestle when you need. Says the Mishnah, right? The first white line. Amar Rabbi Eliezer. I just want to say the following, that Rabbeinu Hanano goes from Rabbi Eliezer, when he continues on Daf Kuf Beis, he goes to Rabbi Elazar. Just to know the history, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua lived at the time of Rabbi Yossi. So it makes a lot more sense that if they were having a machlokes between each other, it was Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi. Furthermore, Rabbi Eliezer says, Rabbi Eliezer, if it's Rabbi Eliezer, there was a shul in Tefilla. They had this neger that had a glustara. It wasn't hanging on a rope all the way, suspended in the air. That you were using it the whole time because they felt that there's no even a mechza kaboina. Rabban Gamliel and the elders, and they said that it's aser. So how can you say that it's mutter when Rabbi said it's aser? Now, guys, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabban Gamliel were brother-in-laws. So if Rabbi Elazar here in the Mishnah is Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, then this is a much better of a refutation, because then you're quoting from the prior generations, the Tanach Rabbi Gamliel. If you're speaking about people that live in the same generation, big deal. You can say, Rabbi Eliezer will say, well, Rabbi Yossi will say that you can't bring me a raya from him. I argue with him. Anyways, whether it's Rabbi Eliezer, we have two shittas in the Mishnah, whether mechza kaboina or not, and Rabbi Yossi tells Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Elazar, you're bringing me that story, you have the whole story wrong. The story was pum fakert. That what? That Rabbi Yossi Omer, Isur Meragaway, fakert. People before Rabban Gamliel came felt that there's a mechza kaboina because it was not fully attached with the string hanging. But Rabban Gamliel Maskenim and fakert, they said that it's mutter. They said that it's mutter because since it's a keli, and people who put that in the ground, everyone who looks at it knows they're not going to leave it there permanently. Why would they? You don't need such a fancy neger. You can take a neger without the knob. That keli is good for a pestle. So since it's clear that they will not leave it there, it's completely mutter. Says the second to last Tosfos, a very important klal, and that is as we learned in Masechta Nedarim, I'm reading a middle of the Tosfos, that devarim hamutarim, if something is permitted, and some people say we're not going to do it. You're not allowed to go and tell those people that your chumrah is not needed. So how is it shayich, according to Rabbi Yossi's version, that people were machmer? They never used this nagar if it wasn't fully attached with the rope suspended in the air. Even if it's taka right that al pi the ikar hadin, you are allowed to use it. Once people are noige isur, the Chazal say, that's a good klal to remember. So Tosfos answers another important klal. The Yesh Loimar, when are you not allowed to be matir? If the people that were noyeg isur, they know the din. They know that it's permissible. We want to be machmer. Once they're machmer, don't cool them off. The Yesh Loimar, dahainu kishayoidim shemuter. And they know that what they're doing is a chumrah. Don't come ahead and be matir for them. But if you have a group of people that are noyig iser from their ignorance, they don't know that me'ikir adin it's mutter. They're only machmir because they think there's not even an option. You have to be machmir. Here, Tosfos holds you are allowed to go and tell them that what you're doing is wrong. Okay, let's chop the Gemara. It's very easy. It's all connected to the sugya we had in the beginning of Daf Kuf Aleph. So the Gemara says, that's what we read out of Nashi, that there's another detail, which is this nagar connected and suspended with a rope? Another detail, how strong is the rope? So says the Gemara that benitel beigdoi, that if there is a rope that connects this nagar, that means when you take it out of the ground, it's not laying there, it's suspended. And the rope is so strong that if you want to lift up this bolt, you don't have to hold the bolt, you can hold the rope, and through lifting the rope, you're going to lift the bolt, which means that the rope is not a flimsy rope. If it's connected with a proper rope, kula alma pligi, that you could use it, there isn't even mechsa baina. Everyone sees that this is something that you put in, that you take out. It's not going to be there permanently. Ki pligi dafkuf beis b'she'enoi nitol beigdoi. There is a cord, but the cord is weak. If you want to move around the bolt, if you chop it by the cord, it's going to rip. Here is Mar Savar, that since the Yesh V'Roishay Gelustera, and therefore Toiras Keli Yolav, and therefore, like Rashi says, Shitas Rashi, not Toisus, that is a Muktzah issue, but it's about Mexico Boina. It's not Mexico Boina. And Mar Savar and Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Elazar holds, no, that Kima the Ein Nitel Be'igdoi, which means that the rope is irrelevant. It's as if there is no rope. When you put it in the ground, people will think that you're going to leave it there. If you're putting something to leave it there on Shabbos, then you're doing a boina. Now, that's not your kavana, but it looks like boina. Then you're not allowed to do it. And that is where we limit the machlokes in the Mishnah, God willing, to be continued. All right, that was great.
Shkoyach.
Guys, we're rolling into the end over here. With the help of Hashem, we are learning ERUVIN Daf Kuf Beis. We left off on Daf Kuf Beis Amud Aleph, 3 lines from the top of the Amud by the Mishnah. As we head towards the Siyum of Masechtas ERUVIN, we're going to start to have a series of Mishnayos that are speaking about certain rules of Shabbos that might be asur midrabanan. There is another very important klal that ein shvus b'mikdash, translated that rabbinic laws were never lechatchila imposed when it comes to temple service. And I'm emphasizing temple service because, as we'll be learning, this is the whole sugya that teaches us certain things are permitted by Migdash and they are asur ba Medina. The word Medina means outside the Beis HaMikdash. Why are they permitted the Migdash? Because there is a rule, Ein Shvus B'Migdash, but we will be learning various limitations to the rule of Ein Shvus B'Migdash. The first Mishnah, Daf Kuf Beis Amud Aleph, is going to be speaking about the hemshech of what we learned in Daf Kuf Aleph Amud Beis, about this neged hanigrar, about this door bolt. A door bolt, putting a door bolt into the ground, looks like boina. This is the way Rashi learns the sugya. The more it's clear that this was designated to be used as a door bolt, the lesser the problem it is. Because boina means when you're putting something, you're leaving it there. When you put something in and then you plan to take it out and then you put it, it's all temporary, that's much less problematic. And if it's properly connected with the cord, people know that you're going to be taking it out, because if you plan to leave it there, why would you need a cord? So this really will lead us again, as we had in Daf Kuf Aleph, until learning about oil arai. And again, just to make it clear that oil, there's 2 types of oils. Binyan is any part of the building. Oil is when you're making a cover. The cover has to have 1 tefach space width, and underneath you have to have 1 tefach of open space for you to say what you're placing is an oil. There is you placing an oil b'kavana for that which is underneath it. That is more problematic. And making an oil even arai is asur midrabanan. However, as we learned also towards by Shabbos, and as we learned over here in ERUVIN, as we learned, we quoted this already yesterday, that being moisiv on an oil is okay. And then there's also the type of oil that we mentioned yesterday, that you're doing something that de facto makes an oil, but your kavanah is not to use the area under the covering, but you want to use that which is above this horizontal platform that you're placing. Here we are b'chlal a lot more lenient. Here, even if there was nothing there before, even if what you're placing is an oil and mechitzas, if it's temporary, here, as we learned yesterday, that if you build it milmayla lamata, it's going to be mutar, and there are also many other hetedim as well. We're going to quote the machlokes we had in Masechta Shabbos, learning about the sugi of oil. How can you put on a hat on Shabbos? Right, a hat, at least when the fedora hats that we wear, when the brims had a tefach width, you're making an oil. If you put on a baseball cap, you're making an oil. That's a very important sugi we had on Shabbos, as we'll have it over here. I know it's an oil arav, it's so what? You can only be moisiv al oil aray. You can't make an oil aray. And here for sure, when you put on a cap, your kavanah is to protect that which is underneath it. You're protecting your face. We're going to go into the Mishnah of Kuf Beis Amud Beis. Also, Migdash, Medina, whether one can replace a bandage with dressing on Shabbos. The issue is that dressing, which is cream, if you smooth it out, then you're violating an Isur D'Oraisa of memachek, of smoothing. Okay? We're not speaking about the other issue, which is you can't put on medicine on Shabbos. Tosfos will explain, we'll read the Tosfos, why that's not relevant over here. Kohanim, when they did an avodah, they're not allowed to have any sort of chatzitza interposing their hand from the clay kodesh. So if a kohen were to be wearing a bandage on his hand, him removing it that's the pshat, ein shvuz b'mikdash, that he's doing it in order to do the avodah. So therefore, again, there's going to be a difference between Migdash and Medina. And if we'll have enough time, we'll begin already the final Mishnah, Kuf Beis Amud Beis, that speaks about repairing a stringed musical instrument, and where the difference between Migdash and Medina. Lav Daf gets connected that much to Ein Shvuz B'Migdash. We're going to learn various opinions. Repairing a stringed instrument could be done in a way where you're mamish violating an Isur D'Oraisa. Many times, if you were to make a proper kshira on a string, you would properly fix it. Kshira is asur d'oraisa. We're never matar isur d'oraisa theoretically. However, if you remember, we had in Rabbi Eliezer de Mila that if Hashem revealed that doing a certain mitzvah overrides the Shabbos, for example, Mila's doicha Shabbos, Rabbi Eliezer holds that machshirei Mila is also doicha Shabbos. Playing music by Levium, even though really there's a machlokes if the Iker Shira is bepeh, remember that, if the Iker Shira is bekoil, our sugyas following, whether it's connected to this machlokes or not, is irrelevant. That playing musical instruments is part of the avodah that's essential, and any avodah that overrides the Shabbos, we can shech the carbon tamid, then you have to play the musical instruments. So if that will be the case, then Bamigdash, you can call that machshirei mitzvah, because the mitzvah is not to make the tie, but without properly tying up the string instrument, then you can't play it. So here again, there'll be a difference between Migdash and Medina. Gewaldik. So Chevra Daf Kuf Beis, right, top Mishnah, the Amid, 3 lines from the top of the Amid. The Hemshech to the Mishnah we learned prior. Neged HaNigrod. If you have a doorbolt, here, unlike the previous Mishnah that never spoke about being, the Mishnah previously did not speak about it being connected with a string. The Gemara introduced that, whether it's nitel be'igdoi, whether it's eino nitel be'igdoi. Here, clearly mirroring the Mishnah we had on top of Kuf Aleph. Remember that makeshift door. It's a bolt. It's connected with a rope, which is good. Why is that good? Because people see that you don't plan to leave it there. Because why would you need a rope? And therefore, what would be the problem? Again, we're following Shitas Rashi. Mechze kaboina. Mechze kaboina is a isur derabanan. So here we introduce for the first time over here, since ein shvuz b'migdash, noyalin boy b'migdash. Oh, says Rashi, neged hanigrod shekashur b'deles avol einoi tolui. It's not completely suspended in the air, because if we remember the top Mishnah and the last daf by the door, our Mishnah, not the Braisa, if the door that we learned then is completely suspended in the air, there wasn't a machlokes. There is no mechze kaboina. So it must be, says Rashi, that we're speaking about the door bolt. It's taka connected with the string, but if you leave it hanging, some of it is touching the ground. Why? Because shahachevel aruch umetoich shenigrar, says Rashi, einoi nira kikosher. It doesn't look like it's completely attached already, which makes it look like it's not going to be left there. Another detail for our Mishnah, not to go into the machlokes we had before between Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yossi. Another detail, says Rashi, there isn't this type of knob, because if you have the knob and it looks like the pestle, here also you can argue that there's no problem. It's not a Mexican boina. In other words, Rashi is learning the Mishnah in a way that it doesn't lead us to say that this Mishnah machlokes varchakach stam. Either Tanach can have the same din. It is a case where there is an issue of Mexican boina. Mexican boina is a shvus, right? Let's read the next Rashi. Noyalan boy b'migdash, the shvus ba'almuhu, the ain't a boina mamish. Why is that? Because it is connected on a string. Because hoyel v'kosher. If it would not be connected, Rashi holds, if you take a piece of metal and you put it in the hole in the ground, and that is what keeps the door in place, Rashi holds that's boina. Also, the Isur Da'iraisa, you can't do in the Migdash. But since it's connected with a rope, there's no glue to it. It's not completely hanging in the ear. These are the nuances Gavaldik we learned in the last daf. So it's an issue of Mechzeke boina. However, the ain't shvos that abanon the Migdash, the loy gazru sham. And therefore, back in the Mishnah, Medina. But outside the Beis HaMikdash, it's also midrabanan. Ve'hamunach. Hamunach means that if it's completely unattached, we're following Mishnah Rashi. Unattached, Rashi says not Mechzeke boina. Unattached is boina. Also means it's it's also daraisa. Yechayiv chatas. Okay. Very good. Rabbi Yehuda takes everything down one notch, leniently. He's one notch down. If it's hamunach, guys, we're not saying it's okay. It's taka not attached, but it's not boina. You're not going to leave it there. You're putting it you're only leaving it in there for a while, and then you're going to take it out. So it's Mechzeke boina. So Mechzeke boina is a shvus. Ain't shvus b'migdash. So hamunach muter b'migdash. The hanigrar, if it's connected with a rope, let's follow all Rashi. That's Rabbi Yehuda. Even if it's not completely suspended in the air, to appreciate the hemshach of these Mishnayos, Rabbi Yehuda holds then hanigrar, it's going to be permitted because it's already not even Mechzeke boina. We learned in Abraisa more details. Ezehu neged hanigrar, that you are allowed to use it only in the Beis HaMikdash or not in the Medina. That means we're looking for an issue where there's only a Mechzeke boina. Says the Braisa, kosher, if it's tied with a rope. The tolui means it's partially suspended. Gavaldik. Learning last daf now helps us understand this clear. But it's not fully suspended. That's the case lit Tanakama. That's called Mechzeke boina, which is why it's mutter b'migdash v'lo b'medina. Rabbi Yehuda, as we just learned in the Mishnah, holds no. If it's connected with the rope, if it's attached with the rope, it's not called munach. Then it's not even Mechzeke boina. In that case, will be even b'medina mutter. Ezeu neger shonei alam only b'migdash v'lo b'medina. This is just elaborating what we just learned in the Mishnah. It's called she'ena likosher v'likoli. Forget about it. It's not fully hanging in the air. B'chal, there's no rope. And what do people do when they take it, if it's not connected at all? That when you take it out of the ground, even this is not boina. It's only Mechzeke boina. That is taka also the Medina midrabanan, and that is what is permitted b'migdash because of the rule of ein shvus b'migdash. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, halacha kidei b'Yehuda, but he adds this very important word b'nigrar when it's still attached. Here we follow Rabbi Yehuda that holds that it's not even Mechzeke boina, and therefore it's mutter even by Medina. However, that's only when it's attached, when it's hanging. If it is completely unattached, what he's really saying is, then it's boina mamish. And if it's boina, he doesn't agree with Rabbi Yehuda that when it's completely unattached, it's only Mechzeke boina. Shmuel is saying we only paskin like Rabbi Yehuda b'nigrar. If it's unattached, it's boina mamish. If it's boina mamish, then even b'migdash, such a bolt may not be used. Amar Rava, another detail. That when do we say that when it's attached to the doorway? Oh, we not paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. That's only if it's attached to the door itself, and not to the lintel above it. In other words, it's all about what it appears like. When it's attached to the door, it's more evident that you're putting it in, that you're taking it out. If it's connected to the area of the frame, then it's less evident. And again, it's going to be already not a mechzeka boino, right? Not the way we're paskening. It's going to be considered unattached, and it's not isur d'oraisa. And therefore, both here and there, both Bamigdash and B'Minyan. Taking about Eini or Rav Tavla, he went to Mechuzah and v'chazalahu dahal d'tali be'ibra d'dasha. He saw a bolt that was connected to the ibra d'dasha, not to the door, but the face to the lintel itself, to the bar above it, to some area, not the door itself. And people were using it, and v'lo yamahu v'lo midi. So the Gemara says, now we're putting our Gemara is going together with the Gemara we learned above. Everything we learned now was like the Gemara said on top of Kuf Beis, connected to the prior Mishnah. It's a hemshech of Mishnayis. She'enoi nitel be'igdoi. If the rope is so strong that nitel be'igdoi, then I don't care where the cord is connected to. It's not even mechzek boina, and not only mutter b'migdash. You don't need a heter. It's even mutter b'medina. Weiter. Rav Avya went to the city of Nardo, and he Gavra come out to the big gemi that he was securing this bolt with a reed. The reed is very flimsy. Amar Dain Lo Nitrog. He says, no, that's not good. You won't be able to move it. Or the reed is so flimsy. That's called Einu Nitl Be'igdoi. Don't do that. Be smarter. Use a better rope. Then you won't have any issue, even on a rabbinic level, of Mexico. Says the Gemara Boy, Rab Zeira Nikmaz Mahum. Atkan, just speaking out the whole sugya by heart. When do we say that it's only a Mexico boina issue? There's some other advantage which makes it less problematic. And that is that even when you put the bolt in the ground, it doesn't go all the way into the ground. Some of it remains above the ground, which that leads the observer to think more, you're going to take it out. You don't want to have in front of your house or behind your house, any area, front, back of the door, something that's protruding above the ground. It's dangerous. What happens if you completely, when you put it in the ground, it goes almost all the way in. Obviously, if it goes all the way in, it's not going to serve as a bolt. But nikmas means it's going to be completely embedded in the ground. That looks more like you're going to leave it there. There's certainly a Mexican issue. So is that more problematic? So Amar Rav Yosef, mighty bayalach, what's even your question? That if nishmat, that if the cord breaks, then it's asur. Nikmas, if the cord doesn't break, even if when you put the bolt in the ground, it gets fully embedded, it's mutter. It's clearly we're speaking about it. Rabbi Yehuda says, punt fakert, that nikmas, afal pisha, eino nishmat, even if it's connected to a strong rope, and it's a rope that nitol be'igdai, since when you put the bolt in the ground, it goes full the way in, then it's going to be asur here, takas, asur, patanal asur, not midoraisa, but because it's machzika as he speaks out. And now, it's a machlokes tanoim. So hold on. So Rabbi Yosef has the right to say who we paskin like, but that was not his question. Because had Rabbi Yosef known, at least then, that this is a machlokes tanoim, it was already pre-established that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Allah Rabbi Yosef ben nikmas. So therefore, why are you asking? And again, it could be that this was, I'm sorry, good. So that we're challenging Rav Zeira. And why indeed do we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda by nikmas? Even if it's connected with the cord, even if the cord won't break when you pick it up, when you move it about using the cord. Okay. Wait a minute, guys. Again, we learned the first Rashi in today's daf that says that our Mishnah, for it not to go against or not to go into the machlokes of the prior Mishnah, our Mishnah was speaking about a neged that doesn't have a glustera. What was the advantage of a glustera? We learned at the end of last year. Because the moment this bolt can also be used for something else, it lends one to acknowledge that you're not going to leave it in there permanently. You're doing it now because you don't have anything else. That's an advantage. That takes away the problem. So he asks, Asaloi Beisiyad, if you made some sort of handle to the bolt. Here again, Rashi says it, you make the bolt resemble a pestle. Amalei, so Abaye tells Rab Nechume, Buchna ka'amrat. You're asking me about a boat with a pestle? Itmar. That Amar Rab Nechume, Bar Ada, not Bar Zachariah. That also, loy beis yad, that's mutter. And that is why Rashi mentioned it's more not just not getting into the machlokes, because we paskin that if there is something that indicates that this negod has multi-purpose, it's also a keli for something else that's needed, then b'chlal it's not a problem because it's clear that you're not going to leave it there, and therefore there is no boina involved. Now, Atkan, just to repeat for the final time, we learned a lot of yesterday's share, and this whole Amid until now, Kishitas Rashi, that it's about boina or and mechza keboina. Tosfos and many other Rishonim learned the whole sugya, Kuf Aleph, and now of Kuf Beis about muktzah. The reason why Tosfos does that is because now we are at the end, we're in the second or the last line of the narrow lines. The Gemara clearly is going to be speaking about muktzah. Now, Rashi, it's not a stira. We're going be'inyan le'inyan. According to Tosfos, that this whole sugya is about if it's muktzah, and all of it makes sense. If it was better designated for it to be used as the bolt, it's less muktzah. If it's also a keli, a pestle, it's not muktzah, it's a keli. If it's not a keli, then it is muktzah. But now we're going to for sure learn about hilchas muktzah. Hahu sharisa, it was a very large beam. The Hava Bei Rebbe, Pedos, that was in the house of Rebbe Pedos. The Havu Madnu Bei Aswara, that you needed 10 people to lift it. And Vishadu Le'adasha, and on Shabbos, it's not a bolt, but you want to make sure that the door cannot open in a given direction. So you placed against the door this large sharisa. Now, what is the issue here? There's no boina. Nothing is affixed in. You're not putting a door in the doorpost. You're not putting a peg in the ground. You're just leaning a beam against the door. Here, for sure, it's a muktzah issue. And and Apudah said nothing. Why? Amar Toiras Keli Oleha, which is why it's not muktzah. Toiras Keli was people used it as a bench. But since it was used as a Keli, rendering it ois muktzah, so now you can move it around also for this purpose. Tosfos reminds us that's the fourth Tosfos, Ahu Sharisa, that in Masechta Shabbos we really had a machlokes about kelim that are so large that you cannot move them about. And really both, it's a machlokes between Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef, and it's only about how large does it have to be. But normally there is a certain point that when even movable kelim are so heavy you cannot move them, they become muktzah. So Rashi says, Tosfos says that that's not connected to our sugya because this sharisa was de facto moved about during the week. So for those of us who remember Shabbos Lamed Hey. So if something is never moved about, it can always be muktzah. If something is used, that's the case over here, they would use it. They would use it not only as a bench, but whenever they needed to bolt the door, they would use that. So the fact that it's very heavy is a non-issue. The issue is whether it's mechza kabayna. That was his point. It's not muktzah. Again, Rashi. It's not mechza kabayna, nor is it muktzah. Next, hahu asisa, something similar, a mortar that was in the house of the master Shmuel, and it was very large. The hava machzekes aderiva. Aderiva, Rashi says, is a lesech, and a lesech or a half a lesech. Just a lesech is a half a koy, right? So it was very, very large. And here again, let's go that the issue is maybe if something is this large, it should become muktzah. So Shari Mar Shmuel Lemishtei Yadasha, he did allow you to move it towards the door to function as a bolt, different type of bolt. Here the issue is not boina, not mechza kaboina, it's muktzah. Why? Because Toiras Keli Olel, and the learning with Tosfos, yes, if something is very heavy and it's never moved about during the week, but Rabbi Yosef, there is a certain size and weight in which it becomes muktzah. But this is a mortar. That's why he's giving Kalim that it had another function. People moved it around since it was moved during the week, and therefore it has a Toiras Keli, so therefore it's not muktzah. And now, mamish like we had in the last daf, and now it flows better now, Rashi. If we're speaking about the sugya of binyan, now we're going to go into oil, which is a derivative, right, of binyan. And again, this whole din that we're going to have from here all the way until the top Mishnah of Kuf Beis Amid Beis about moisiv al oil aray is okay. Moisiv on binyan is not okay. Moisiv on an oil is okay, but making an entire oil aray, especially if the kavanah is to use that which is underneath it, is not okay on Shabbos. Sholach le Rami bar Yecheskel le Rav Amram. Neymar lon mar meholei milama al yosef. Please share with us those great words, the Amrat lon that you, Rabbi Amram, once shared with us in the past in the name of Rab Asi concerning kipei da'arba. So they would have boats, and on top of these boats, if you can have a picture, there were arches. Why did they place those arches there? Because since you're out there in the ocean, the sun can be beating down on you, or it can be raining down on you. So they would sometimes use these arches as a structure, as a frame upon which to throw mats, to throw other types of coverings, which would protect you from the sun and from the rain. What's the issue? The issue is that's a classical case of an oil arai, again, connected to the study of binyan, Larashi. So they ask Rav Amram, remember you taught us something, share what you taught us. So Shalachin, Rav Amram says that this is what Rav Asi said, that Hani keep the arbe. So first of all, if this man sheyesh behem tefach, if each one of these arches themselves have the thickness of a tefach, which means you are already under an oil, you're just adding to the oil. Inami, or even if each individual arch doesn't have the thickness of a tefach, but they are placed so close together that in between one and the other, you don't have 3 tfachim, there's less than 3 tfachim one to the other, which therefore be based on the rule of lavud. It's as if it's fully covered. So since there is already an oil, so then you can add to it. Maybe machatzeles, you can bring these mats if there's a need for it. And you can cover it, my tamo, because since there is already a tefach, and then v'shaper dami. That was his chiddush. That was the novelty that we have to remind ourselves, right? The application we spoke of when we learned Masechta Shabbos, that it's common on baby strollers, right? That you have this type of awning that you can accordion-wise open it and close it, and you're doing it mamish to protect the baby from rain, to protect the baby from the sun. You're making an oil. It's taka arai, but you're making an oil arai, and it's again not like we learned on Daf Kuf Aleph that you're putting 2 pots on top of one pot on top of 2 pots. It's not for what's above it, which is less problematic. Here it's to use what's underneath it. So the good thing about these baby strollers is that even when it's folded up, there is already a tefach. Make sure there's already a tefach. Then there is no shaila. If it's folded in a way that when it's folded up, you don't even have the tefach, then that is the Isur D'Rabbanan of making an oil arai. I'm going to speak about an umbrella, which was later Yehuda Namid based. We already spoke about it.
So, Rabbi, in our shul, where we have like the mats, if it was raining and you wanted to put a tarp on top of it, seems like according to this it would be fine because we already have the covering.
100%, because we mamish by us we have the schach. Correct. It says another case. Hanu dichle, there were rams. The Habalei Rafuna that Rafuna owned, and Rafuna lived in a place that those rams needed coverings over them. The biyamama ba'utula, they needed to be shaded. The sun was not good for them, and at night, it was very hot. So at night, you wanted to take off those coverings in order for there to be more air. So also lekame derav, to ask him whether you can uncover on Shabbos. And Amar Lein, he says that zil kroich budya, what you should do is that before Shabbos, already have the mats on top, rolled up. The mila is again, that even when it's rolled up, there's at least a covering of a tefach. And make sure that when it's rolled up, there's at least 1 tefach. And based on this rule of Rabbi Amram, so now l'machar pashta, you can unspread it because you're only being moisiv al oil arai, and being moisiv al oil arai is like we just said is shaper dami. Amar Rav, in the name of Rav Chia. Now let's go me'inli a curtain. All right. What about a curtain? So a curtain is not an oil. So here a curtain is arai. So it's not. A curtain is b'chlal not a problem. There isn't even a mechsa kaboina because everyone knows that it's a curtain. It's much less problematic than the negar or than the delis. It's not an oil, but you have to make sure that the curtain is a curtain and not an oil. What will make something into an oil? If it has a top of a tefach, and that will be the details of what we're learning right now. V-line, if you have a curtain, mutal and twice, you can hang it, and you can take it down on Shabbos. Because since there isn't even a tefach on the top, it's not called an oil. It's not boina because you see that it's temporary. It's not even mechseka boina. Hang up and take down. Kilas chasanim, a canopy over a bed, Now these canopies, here's the issue. Do you have an oil of a tefach? So he says that mutal parka, you can take it down and you can put it up on Shabbos, because here again, we're speaking about a canopy that doesn't have a tefach. Now, exactly where would it have a tefach? So we're going to chazer some rules about how you view such a canopy. So here we're going to have to limit this halacha. That you are allowed to take down, laparka means to take down this canopy and also to hang it up. If you don't have the here we have a TP, it's called. In other words, you don't have 4 posts. If you would have 4 posts, then when you put something on top, then you have a bona fide oil. If you were speaking about there's only 2 posts, so it goes down on a complete slant, and in the apex, in the top, you don't even have a tefach. It's stuck on, you're not chayiv because it's arai, but you're making a brand new oil arai, you're not being moisef, and it's asid. And furthermore, if he ain't the tefach, still right? If within 3 tvachim from the apex, it already protrudes out a tefach, so then because of the rules of lavud, we consider that width of a tefach to be all the way to the top. Again, because of the rules of lavud, that's a great picture, then it's asid. But we're not done yet. Really, he says more. Forget about the top 3 tvachim. Forget about that. Go to the bed itself. If when you are in the bed, on that one side, on each one side, you have from the bed until the top, there is the width of a tefach, we consider this wall as one great oil. Now that will be problematic. Because what are we creating a bed that doesn't even have 2 tefachim width? What kind of human being can fit in such a bed? We're turning to the we don't allow for the entire incline from the top until one side of the bed to go out a tefach. It can only go out less than a tefach because of this new rule. Oh, that was the good picture that you just showed. Yes, we should go tefach. Then there's another rule we have to remember, and that is that shipua ohalim ki ohalim dami, that we view that wall not like a wall, but yes, like a covering, which is the whole reason why you're putting a canopy. Because that's what we spoke out yesterday, and again, the last daf and this daf, that there's a big difference between if you're creating an oil, but you don't want to use the area underneath it to begin with, it's much less problematic. When you are creating a covering and you want to use the area underneath it, it's much more problematic. Why are you putting this kipas chasanim? Because you want to sleep underneath it, whether you're throwing a mosquito net or you want to be protected from whatever. So there, if the shipua is a tefach, you have a problem. Now, because of that, you have the picture in Rashi, or you had before on the screen. Hold on. If we are going to view the entire incline as an oil, and the entire shipua from each side cannot be a tefach, so you explain to me. So what are you telling me, that the bed is less than 2 tefachim width? So each side doesn't have a tefach. How can you fit on that bed? So that's why Rashi gives the picture that they made a certain frame in which that you had many ups and downs. Each shipua cannot cover more than a tefach. It has to be actually, each shipua cannot cover even a tefach. Each shipua has to be less than a tefach. But if you put many of them, then this can be of help, and you can have a bed in which you can fit underneath it. Okay, now, guys.
Yeah, how do you get in, Rabbi?
Huh?
So how do you get in there?
Oh, Kasha, how do you get in? I have no idea. No idea. Okay, but in other words, really, when you learn these limitations, I mean, we don't have this minute, but what we learned on Amud Aleph is very important, and that is that as long as you already hung this type of kipas chasanim, at least rolled up on top, and it already has the thickness of a tefach, then you can unroll it. So basically, maybe that's what he means to say. He's limiting it and limiting it. He's saying, you know what, do yourself a favor, prepare it from before Shabbos. You roll it up, but it should already be on top covering a tefach. Siyana, guys, we learned this in Shabbos. Siyana is a hat. What type of hat? Not a yarmulke. Siyana is what we would call a fedora hat or a shtreimel. Any hat that goes beyond the your face. A baseball cap. I know that an oil needs to have a tefach, so maybe in the very narrow brims there is a non-issue. Again, we're learning like Rashi. Rashi learns that the issue here is oil. You are allowed to wear a siyana. We learned in the Braisa that it's asur. So like kashe, You're making a brand new oil aray. When we learned that it's shari, is you have these new, I'm not going to call them modern, because many years ago the brims were very narrow. If you're very outdated, then it's okay, you don't even have a tefach. 1 second. If anything protruding above your head, going out the tefach is a problem. Forget about a hat. What about a hoodie? What about a talus? What happens if you take a talus and you throw it over your head, and if it's going out a tefach? So that's going to be a problem. Right? If you're going to throw over your cloak a tefach beyond your head, pachinami da'asr, and that can be. We're learning Gemara Rashi. Now, the way you learn the Gemara will affect halacha, like any other Gemara. So because of that, the Ella means, Danny, we mentioned this, I want to speak out about the umbrella, that an oil, the definition of an oil, is when you put something in a fixed place, even if it's an oil aray, and you now will go underneath it, like kilas chasanim, like on the boat, they put out, a boat is called fixed, even though the whole boat is moving, but it's in a fixed place. Something that you put on your body and you're moving around is b'chlal not an oil. That's the way we paskin, the way we learn the Gemara. So hold on. If there is no oil issue, not on your talus and not on a felt hat and not on a baseball cap, again, because you're not placing the cap in a fixed location. When I say fixed, it doesn't have to be kavua. You know, in the shul, when you have these movable tents, so you shouldn't stand in the sun. Like the tent was already open, that's different. But opening that up is an isur d'Rabbanan. Why is that? Because you are creating an oil aray. Because you're leaving it in one location. You're leaving it in one location. If it's built in a way that if you just stand it up as is, it's already a tefach thick in the top and there's one tefach underneath it, then you are moisev oil and it's mutter. But that's because you are leaving it in a fixed place. But when you put a hat on your head, you're moving around the whole time. I know that it's protecting you, but the hat is not affixed at all, and that's not an issue. So what's the issue between? So what would be the issue of putting on a felt hat? Why do we have these two opinions? Yes, shari or braisa asur. That's a whole different issue, says the Gemara. All this like Rashi. That if the hat fits tightly around you, you have a strap under your chin. In other words, if a wind will blow, it won't get blown off. So then you are allowed to wear it. When we learned in the braisa that it's asur, delay mihadak. So it says Rashi. I'm reading inside Rashi. The tamaloi mishamoyelu. Means this answer, Rashi, there is no oil issue at all. It's not called an oil. We can all relate to this. If you are wearing your hat in a location that with the ruach mitsuya, there's a possibility that it's going to get blown off your head, then what happens? You might go and carry it. Who didn't have their hat get blown off their head? You go running after it. Now, if that happens, you have to. If there's no eruv, you have to make sure when you chop it, to put it on your head. But here there's the chashash. You might walk when you're putting it on your head. And va'asila asuye. And that's why kima hadak v'kashul b'rechua tachas savarai. That's mahadak. There's a strap under your neck, right? Even if it gets blown off, it's not going to fly away. Then it's mutter. And if not, it's asur. In other words, it's not an oil. The Noid Yehuda quotes this Gemara when he spoke about an umbrella. We're not speaking about opening up an umbrella. We're even speaking about why don't we use an umbrella that's already open. And even though that ultimately, we quoted this when we learned Shabbos, that the minig is not to use it. But his tshuva points out that there should not be an issue. And one of the reasons why he holds it's not an issue of oil adi, I think he was even speaking about opening it up, is because you don't put the umbrella in a fixed place. When I say fixed place, it's even temporarily. You're not placing it down. You're holding it in your hand. He was arguing that this should be like a hat, that since it's on you and you're moving about the whole time, it's less problematic, or according to our understanding, it's b'chlal not an issue with oil. Okay, go on. Let's move on to the next Mishnah. Again, we have a couple of more Mishnayos, and like we mentioned, this is all a series of Mishnayos that will mamish go until the end of the Masechta, differentiating between Migdash and Medina. So if you want to know where is the Sugi and Shas that speaks the most about Ein Shvuz B'Migdash, and again, throughout all these Mishnayos, we're going to limit the leniency of Ein Shvuz B'Migdash. That's the whole siyum of the Sechtas ERUVIN. Now, the Mishnah here is speaking about a movable closet, which is very important. a house of fixing a door, that is what we learned on Daf Kuf Aleph. That's a bigger issue. Here we're speaking about a movable keli, and even though we learned the rule that ein binyan bekelim, Rashi says, we're learning the sugya lefi Rashi, that this Tana holds yesh binyan bekelim. So the question is, if the pivot goes out of its place, are you allowed to re-put it, to reaffix it? Is that called binyan or is that not called binyan? There's a difference between the bottom pivot and the top pivot. When the bottom pivot falls out, if you can just imagine it, it's still functioning. Maybe it's not perfectly aligned, but you can still open and close the door. If the top tzir falls out, then the whole door taikfa kaparas. Putting back the top one is a much greater act of building, says the Mishnah. Machzirin tzir hatachten b'migdash avoloy b'medina. Let's read inside Rashi quickly as the Gemara is going to speak out. Machzirin tzir hatachten shel delis, but what delis? Of a movable article, of a chaloin, shida, delis chaloin. It's a door that closes a window in a sheda table migdal. Shepischei mitzideim. In that case, that's important because the door is standing vertically, right? The door is on the side. If the top seat, if the top hinge, if the top pivot is still properly affixed, it's easier to put it back. And the ein kan binyan. So what's the issue? If ein kan binyan, what's the issue? The issue is that if you're going to put it back using a keli, that will be your makeh b'patish. So maybe we should be goyzer, don't put it back because you might put it back with a hammer. That's taka gzeira, but that's only a shvus. Ain't shvus b'migdash. And not in the Medina. That's the way Rashi learns the Gemara. However, if the top pivot fell out, therefore Rashi says it's asur de'oiraisa because putting it back is an act of binyan. We're speaking about a movable article. And here is where Rashi says at the end of the Mishnah that our Tana holds yesh binyan bekeli. It's only shvus that does not exist in the Mikdash. That is the Tana Kama. Mamish, like we had in the Mishnah Nafkum Beis Amadalov, that the Tana Rabbi Yehuda took everything down one notch. Lekula Amar Rabbi Yehuda Ha'elyain, right? Even putting that back in is only asur midrabanan, the same isur. It's not called a binyan. It's a door. It was already there before. Putting it back in is only asur because you might use a hammer. That's a gzeira. But migdash ain't shvus b'migdash. V'hatachtoin, it's mamish considered nothing. It getting out, it moving out, putting it back in is not considered an act. You're not going to use a hammer anywhere, and that's permitted even by Medina. More details in the Gemara. See it. We're speaking here about the bottom pivot, the one that's less problematic of a delis. Again, in a delis of a shida, teva, umigdal, carriage, a crate, a closet, no, it's a movable article. I'm saying movable because if it's a door to something that's affixed to the ground, it's a bigger issue of binyan. Okay, b'migdash machzirin u'b'madina doichakin. In the Beis HaMikdash, even if it fully came out, you can put it back in. In the Medina, if it only began to go out, it's a little bit unadjusted, then you can move it back to the right place. That's called doichakin. You can push it back in. But if it entirely came out, like the Tanakh and the Mishnah, with these more details, then it's going to be asur midrabanan because you might do it with a keli. But if the top tzir came out, kam bekan, both b'medina and b'migdash, then lo yachzor, then you can't put it back. Now the way Rashi learns, obviously, this lo yachzor is because it's asur midoiraisa. So therefore, Rashi says that the next words in the Tanur Rabbanan, in the Braisa, the Gzeira is going back explaining why is it that if the bottom pivot came out, the Medina, then we say if it only came out a little bit, then you can push it back in. If it fully comes out, you cannot. The Gzeira goes on the bottom, the Medina. Because if you're putting it fully back in, Shema Yiska, you might put it back with a hammer. You might knock it back in. And doing that, is chayav chatos. Again, Rashi says that our sugya is following the shita, yesh binyan bekelim. However, if the door is not to a movable article, elaborates the Braisa, but it's shalbur, shaldus, shalyatzia, here it's more problematic. lo yachzer, the im ichzer, you're going to be chayiv chatos. Like Rashi says, to have a binyan amechuber lakarka, and we also learned, right, in the Shabbos, and we just learned it not long ago in the Rambam, that Bachlal, when it comes to building, this is one of the few exceptions, that there isn't a minimum shiur for you to be chayiv chatos. Even a kol shehu of binyan is machayiv you on chatos. Let's go to the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah speaks about placing a bandage that has dressing. Dressing was a thick ointment. Now I want to just speak out the Tosfos that says the following: that putting on ointment from the outset on Shabbos is also there's an isur of bachlal of taking a remedy on Shabbos. However, the Tosfos quotes the Rashi. I'm saying Shitas Rashi. That Rashi says, if you want to read it, you can read it inside the third Tosfos from the top. That shchikas hamamanim is not connected to our Mishnah, because whenever you already had a bandage with dressing prior to Shabbos, putting it back is not included in that gezerah. You already used this before. The issue might be that if when you put the bandage back on, you're gonna smooth it out more. It's not that you're smoothing out your body. You're smoothing out the ointment itself, and that is an isur of mimoreyach. Says the Mishnah, that in the Beis Hamikdash you are allowed to move, you are allowed to replace it. Why would that be? Why would that be? Where this is a you can put it on very gently, but you might come and violate mimoreyach. Says Rashi, right, the third line under the Gemara. This biyadai is fundamental. We're speaking about a bandage on a place in the body of the kohen that because of his avodah, here is where we will introduce that ein shvus b'mikdash is only if it's connected to the avodah. In order for his avodah, he has to remove it. That's another detail that we just spoke out from the Tosfos. In other words, he already had it bandaged. Just to take that away. No, there's no issue of shchikas hamamanim at all. Now, and in order for him to do the avodah without a chatzitza and not to let it al yada, you should like take chitzatzas ben avodah. Like Rashi says, because chatzitza is speselus ba, because it says v'laka hakoyin and the kivon the chayitz. Right now, the widest line in Rashi under the Tosfos loy havalekicha b'koyin. So says the Mishnah, he's allowed to put it back, the same bandage with the dressing. Because the if you say you can't put it back, then what's going to happen? He won't remove it off his hand. And if he won't remove it off his hand, he's not going to do the avodah. And this reminds us, Rashi, that is one of the three things that we're going to learn soon in Masechtas Beitza, that shehutru soifan mishum tchilasan. Since this might prevent him at the end of doing an avodah, so lechatchila they were mata. Now you tell the kohen that when you re-put the bandage, make sure that you don't smooth out the ointment. Fine, you're careful. Avaloi b'medina. Why b'medina? Again, let's keep on going. Rashi is the second line in the widest lines of Rashi. Gezerah shema yimoreya haratia umeruach hainu moichek, which is one of the avis malachas. In other words, it's called memachek. You're smoothing the dressing. Back inside the Mishnah. In Batchila, which means you never had the bandage from the beginning. You're putting it on for the first time. Putting on a fresh bandage with ointment, says the Mishnah, kan v'kan asur. Why kan v'kan asur? Again, I know the word is asur. We're learning there's so many different ways of understanding the Mishnah. Rashi holds because it's not a shvus. Look what Rashi says. Wow. He's saying like this, that beautiful. Putting on the bandage in itself is not for sure going to be a violation of memachek. Why? You can put on a bandage with dressing without rubbing it out, without rubbing it in, without smoothing it. It's maybe you're going to put it on very tight. Maybe you're going to smear it around. But that's a shvus. So Rashi says, Gavaldik, if the kohen began Shabbos without the bandage, so there's no chatzitza here. He can do the avodah. Nothing is stopping him from doing the avodah. He doesn't want for his wound to get infected. Okay, we understand that. But him putting on a bandage, it's not called tzorech avodah. You can't say, he's in the Beis Hamikdash. Too late. Don't put on the bandage. That's Shabbos. Gewaldig. Good. Says the Gemara. Tana Rabbanan. Retiya, a dressing, right? A bandage with dressing. Shepersha me'al gabe maka, which is the case of our Mishnah. You had it on before. It fell off. You are allowed to put it back on Shabbos. Here, we're not speaking about Mikdash. We are, like Rashi says, we're speaking about everywhere. And this Baraisa holds that what? The Medina says, Rashi, that one who dressed his wound before Shabbos for the bandage to fall out is something unusual. And the Chachamim, right, again, putting on a bandage with ointment is only asur midrabanan. They don't make the Rabbanans on an unusual occurrence. So learns Rashi in this Tana Rabbanan. Rabbi Yehuda says, that even the Medina, we're all learning Lashitas Rashi, if you had a bandage, if it slipped down, you can push it back up. If it moved up, no, as long as you don't take it off, you can move it around. Furthermore, if you want to clean out some blood, so what do? Don't take it off. Reveal one part, migala mixa saretiya, raise the bandage a little bit on one end, umikaneach, if there is an advantage to wiping out the pihamaka, and then you put it down on that side, and then v'choizer umegala, the other mixa saretiya, umikaneach pihamaka. However, uritiya atzma lo yikaneach, make sure that you never touch the bandage itself upon which there's an ointment, because the issue over here of memachek, right, the smoothing is not your body, it's the ointment. Because that's an act of mimoreach. You're smoothing out the ointment, and that's the whole issue here. Omar Rav Yehuda, in the name of Shmuel, as we had on Amud Aleph, that what? Halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda. In other words, unlike the Tanakh that says that if it fell off the Medina, you can put it back because it's an unusual occurrence. What is Rabbi Yehuda adding? The way he says, if it fell off a little bit, you can put it back up. You can move it up, you can move it down, you can uncover it a little bit. What Rabbi Yehuda basically saying is that if it completely falls off, then it's prohibited to put it on. And
what about if you fully took it off deliberately? That for sure no?
For sure not. And even if it fell off, now we're going to learn another nuance. So first of all, paskening l'chumra. And now, Amar Rav Chisda, that loy shanu, this is going on the Tanakh, that the Tanakh says that when it fully falls off, you are allowed to put it back. That's only if it fell on a keli. But if it fell on the ground, divrei hakol asur, because it looks like you're putting something from a new. Wow. Now, guys, let's remember also that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. But according to this, it comes out, no one is going to debate the fact that Shmuel paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. But now that Rav Chisda added the nuance that their entire machlokes is when the bandage fell on a keli, that means that l'kula alma, if it fell on the ground, it's asur. There could be another way of learning the machlokes. You can say that their machlokes is when it fell on the ground. And there we pass like Rabbi Yehuda. But maybe we can learn the other that if it falls on a keli, everyone will allow you to put it back. And that's the way Rav Ashi learned Pshat. Omar Mar, the son of Rav Ashi, that I was once standing in front of my father, which is Rav Ashi, Havakamina Kamei of Abba, and Naflalea Beisadia, and he had a bandage on from before Shabbos, and it fell on a pillow. That means it fell on a keli, and I saw my father putting it back up. And you know, the way you speak to a parent, you don't tell him you're not allowed to do it. You ask him, doesn't it not say otherwise? So Amina Lei, Savar Lon Mar Lahada Amar Rav Chisda, that the machlokes is Shapir Shal Gabe Keli, Abel Pir Shal Gabe Karka Asur. You guys, you have to chap this. In other words, if not for Rav Chisda, I would have argued that even though we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, but the whole braisa, the machlokes, Tanakh and Rabbi Yehuda is when it falls on the ground. There is where Rabbi Yehuda says, you may not put it up if it completely fell off. But maybe Rabbi Yehuda would be moidem that if it falls on a keli, then you are allowed to put it back up. But based on the way Rav Chisda understood their machlokes, compounded with paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, so how are you allowed the tata? How are you allowed to put on the bandage? And again, Amar Shmuel like Rabbi Yehuda. So Amar so Rav Ashi told me his son Mar that lo shemiali. I never heard of what Rav Chisda said. What he really meant to say is, I don't agree with him. I say that the machlokes of the Stan and Rabbanan is not when it fell on a keli. Fakir, their machlokes is when it fell on the floor. The Tanakh is even lenient over there. Rabbi Yehuda's machmir, and we pass like Rabbi Yehuda when it falls on the floor. My bandage fell on the pillow, falling on a keli. Even Rabbi Yehuda's later that you are allowed to put it back up. So we can pass like Rabbi Yehuda, and still Rav Ashi did the right thing. Okay, I wanted to go a little bit further. I think we'll start the sugya, God willing, tomorrow. And again, the final, this topic will be about tying a string of a harp, which happens often that falls out on Shabbos, that gets torn, that snaps on Shabbos, and Gavaldi. God willing, to be continued.
So Rabbi, this is all about the bandage falling off. But again, does that mean that everybody agrees you can't deliberately take it off and then replace it, or?
You can't replace it. You can't replace a bandage, Danny, with ointment, with dressing. Very important.
Because of the smoothing. Okay.
Aside of you can't put medicine on your body because of shchika samamanim. That's that nuance that we added. That here we're speaking about the fact that you had a bandage on from before. So it's interesting that bandage itself, to put it back up, that's not the issur of putting on medicine. It was already up. Only the issur of memachik. All right, Chavre, to be continued. We're almost there.